Pastoring in a pandemic is in many ways like being the head basketball coach of a team that is in overtime of the championship game. There's a lot that is expected of you in a short amount of time. And even though what your team does and how you respond is a reflection of what's been going on in all of the practices and the season up to that point, in that moment of the overtime game, there are a lot of people that are looking to you to tell them what to do and how to respond. Hi, I'm Bob Johnson. I've been the senior pastor of Cornerstone Baptist Church in Roseville, Michigan for a little over 30 years. And what that means is that for this congregation, I've been the pastor here through the Iraqi war, Y2K, 9/11, the economic depression of 2008, and now the pandemic. So those circumstances have given me a little bit of perspective, at least from an experiential standpoint. But what I have found to be most fruitful in helping the congregation here has actually been from Acts chapter 20. Providentially, when COVID-19 began to explode, I was preaching through the book of Acts, and I was actually in chapter 20. And in verse 28, I saw what Paul's upper room discourse is to the elders there at Ephesus, serve as a template for how our response should be through a pandemic. Nine Marks has produced some articles that just lay out what a lot of churches have done in terms of providing some ideas and ministries and different things for their congregations during this particular pandemic. But what I want to do in this talk is get under the skin of that and get a little bit more behind the scenes. And for us, what were we thinking that led to those ideas? And what I see in Acts chapter 20 and verse 28 is really just two basic things that are reflected in 5 principles. And those two things are lead and love. Acts chapter 20 and verse 28 says, "Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood." Your leadership in a crisis is going to be a reflection of your leadership overall. All that a crisis does is it puts us into a vice and it squeezes out into view what is already there on the inside. What I see in Acts 20:28 is really 5 ingredients of leading and loving that will serve your church well when the storm comes to your door. First of all, be self-aware. Paul says, pay careful attention to yourselves. Pay careful attention to what you are either trusting in or what you are tempted to trust in. Is it yourself? Is it hyper-management? Is it food? Are you tempted to trust in being viewed as the authority in all of these things? Pay careful attention to what you allow to influence you. Be honest about your affections. Are you giving yourself to the Word and prayer? Are you cultivating a heart for the love of Christ? Ask those around you, particularly your wife, your children, to observe you. Are you more anxious? Are you irritable? Are you frustrated? What are you preaching to yourself? What are you singing? I have found that the great songs of the church have certainly intensified their effect on my soul during these times. But also notice that the text says, pay careful attention to yourselves. It's in the plural. So it's not just you paying attention to yourself, it's also your leaders paying attention to one another. And you may need to take the leadership on that in contacting your leaders and checking in on them and asking them how they are doing. How is their soul care going? And care for their souls. And ask them some good questions, and certainly pray for them and pray with them. Paying careful attention to yourself will help you see whether or not you're just relying on yourself because you're not up for this, or relying upon God, who will equip you for the role that He has placed you into. Number 2, not only pay careful attention to yourself, but be congregationally aware. Be self-aware, be congregationally aware. Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock. Even in a quarantine, a shepherd needs to smell like his sheep, at least to the degree that he can. One of the benefits of having elders, and having elders who have oversight of various aspects of the congregation and who are staying in touch with the members of their shepherding groups, is the information that you can constantly glean from those elders as to how your congregation as a whole is doing. For example, we have in our membership, we have members who are in the funeral home business, who are in the medical field, who are on assembly lines, who are small business owners, who are school teachers, who are stay-at-home moms, and we've got everything in between. So the way in which a small business owner who has been quarantined at home and has basically watched his business start to fall apart, his response is going to be a lot different than the nurse who has just spent several shifts zipping up body bags and trying to talk with family members who haven't been able to visit that person and tell them that their loved one has just passed away. And certainly we have members who are a little bit more into conspiracy theories, and others, therefore, who think, and those people who think that, man, this whole thing is just so overblown and over the top. And then others who have just moved out of town and are waiting for a vaccine to be developed before they basically come back to civilization. That's the church. That's the whole congregation. And it's not only a responsibility of the leaders to shepherd those various groups, but to help them give space for the other, help them love one another well. And so I want to resist the temptation of just speaking to one aspect of the congregation and playing to them. I need to be aware of how this is affecting all of my members, so that even in the times of teaching and communication that I do with them, that I'm addressing and identifying all of those things. Number 3, consider your calling. Paul says, the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Now, I want to say this to those of you who are a little bit more prone to fear. And when you find yourself under pressure, you almost give in to panic, not really certain what to do. Listen to that text. The Holy Spirit has made you overseers. There is an entire segment of your congregation. They are looking to you to lead them. They take their cues of how they're going to respond to the pressure of this world by how you are responding to this particular pressure. If you are full of fear and anxiety and just almost put into a position of ambivalence, you've not served them well. And while that may not be a natural strength that you have, Look to the Spirit of God. Look to the promises of God. Lean into those. God will give you wisdom so that you can make good decisions. Brothers, you can't lead from behind, and you have to take the initiative. And what that looked like here is when we began to see how this thing was going to start to unfold. Honestly, somebody had to start the conversation. And that really started with me. I had to identify, even for the leaders, here's the things that we need to talk about. Here's the action plans that we need to adopt. Here's the ideas that we have to talk about. Somebody has to initiate those conversations. And honestly, that really starts with the pastor. For example, in the first 3 weeks of this, it impacted our finances pretty significantly. And I knew nobody wants to have that conversation, but it has to be had. So I threw out a proposed modified budget, not because that's something that I'm always involved in, which I'm really not, but I just knew that has to be on the table. We had to talk about what were some plans for us and what we would do for our congregation. Somebody has to take the lead on that. Well, the Holy Spirit has made you an overseer, and so lean into Him and look to Him for wisdom, and don't be afraid to make decisions with your leaders, but even leading in the decision-making process. You may operate in a way in which you are wisely trying to share as much of the leadership as possible. That is so good. But in a time of pressure, you may need to step up a little bit that level of initiative, and that will help not only your leaders, but as you take a lead in being visible to the congregation, in communicating with them on a regular basis, it does so much to assure them that you are doing what you are able to do even in the midst of that. And like a good dad who just communicates with his family, that's really part of the role that as a pastor that you are having. Paul says that we are to care for the church of God. So the fourth thing, not only being self-aware and congregationally aware and consider your calling by leading, but also loving, caring for the church of God. One of the things that has been really fruitful here is just for me and the elders to continually communicate to the church how much we love them. And the things that you do will demonstrate that, but don't underestimate the impact of your words of actually saying to your people, I love you. I can't wait to be with you. I care about what's going on in your life. One of the things that my wife and I have done even during this season of quarantine is we've intentionally gone on walks and bike rides to different homes of our members. And we've just knocked on the door, or we've texted them, and we've stood at a distance, and we've just said, hey, we just want to come by and say we love you and we miss you. That has been hugely beneficial and encouraging to them. The last thing I want to leave you with, Paul talks about the church that is obtained with the blood of Christ. Recognizing that the church is not our church, that we are accountable to the shepherd of the sheep, the ultimate, the chief shepherd, that Christ died for His church, that He loves her, is such a reminder that I am a steward of the flock that Jesus has purchased and secured with His blood. And while that on the one hand can be terrifying in the sense of, boy, I better not mess up, what I find hugely encouraging from that is that I am part of the flock that He died for. He cares for the shepherds of the sheep. And so he will give you what you need to be able to care well for your congregation, even through a pandemic.